3 times she stood before the kingdom. 3 times they told her she was not enough. The words echoed through the grand hall of Silvermoon Kingdom, as Emily Rosewood stood beneath thousands of golden lights, facing the moment she had feared more than anything. The mating ceremony was supposed to reveal destiny. It was the night when every wolf-born soul hoped to discover the person chosen by fate. For most it was a celebration. For Emily, it had become a reminder of every reason people believed she did not belong. She stood quietly in the center of the ceremony circle, her hands gently folded, trying to ignore the whispers surrounding her. Everyone knew her story. The Omega who had been rejected once. The Omega who had been rejected twice. And now, the Omega standing before the kingdom for the 3rd time. Maybe this time will be different, someone whispered from the crowd. But Emily had heard promises like that before. She had learned not to expect the world to suddenly change its mind about her. Since childhood, Emily had been seen as ordinary. She was born an Omega in a society that admired power, status, and strength. She did not come from a famous family. She did not possess a gift that made nobles admire her. She was simply a healer who spent her days helping others quietly. When villagers needed comfort, Emily was there. When someone was forgotten, Emily remembered them. But kindness was often overlooked when it came from someone without a powerful name. The ceremony continued, and Emily closed her eyes as the ancient ritual began. Deep inside, she already knew what would happen. She had felt the same silence twice before. The same moment when destiny seemed to pass her by. And once again the hall became quiet. The magical bond everyone waited for did not appear. The rejection was clear. A wave of disappointment moved through the crowd. Some people looked away. Others exchanged knowing glances, as if Emily's failure proved everything they had believed about her. But Emily did not cry. She did not argue. She simply lowered her head and accepted the moment with a calmness that surprised everyone. She had spent years being told that being unwanted meant being worthless. Yet a small part of her heart still believed that a person's value could not be decided by one ceremony. Far from the crowd, high above the hall, Lycan King Lucian Blackveil watched the ceremony in silence. He had not planned to pay attention to Emily Rosewood. His responsibilities as the ruler of Silvermoon were greater than any single ceremony. He had spent years carrying the expectations of an entire kingdom, preparing to choose a Luna who would represent strength and tradition. But the moment Emily stood alone after the rejection, something inside him changed. It was not pity. It was not curiosity. It was something deeper that he could not explain. The Lycan instincts he had always controlled became unusually alert. His attention remained fixed on the Omega everyone else had already dismissed. While the kingdom saw a girl who had been rejected 3 times, Lucian saw something different. He saw someone who remained gentle even when the world had not been gentle with her. As Emily turned to leave the ceremony, believing her destiny had ended before it ever began, the Lycan King took one unexpected step forward. And for the first time in years, the entire kingdom stopped looking at Emily Rosewood as someone who was not chosen. They started wondering if they had been wrong all along. The entire hall remained silent as the Lycan King stepped forward. No one expected him to move. No one expected him to notice the Omega who had just been rejected in front of the entire kingdom. For years, Silvermoon had followed the same traditions, and everyone believed they understood how destiny worked. But in that moment, the certainty of the crowd began to disappear. Emily Rosewood slowly turned toward the exit, believing she had nothing left to prove. She had already experienced the disappointment 3 times. She knew the looks people gave her. She knew the quiet conversations that followed her wherever she went. She knew many believed her destiny had already been decided. But before she could leave the ceremony hall, a calm voice stopped everyone. Wait. The single word came from the Lycan King himself. Emily froze. She turned around slowly, unsure if she had heard correctly. Lucian Blackveil walked toward the center of the hall, his presence commanding the attention of every person around him. The powerful ruler who rarely interrupted royal ceremonies had just changed the entire atmosphere with one decision. The crowd watched in disbelief. Some wondered why the king would pay attention to an Omega who had already been rejected. Others believed there had to be a reason they did not understand. Lucian looked at Emily, but he did not see the person everyone else had judged. He saw the way she had accepted disappointment without anger. He saw the quiet strength behind her silence. He saw someone who had every reason to become bitter but had chosen to remain kind. "Why did you leave?" Lucian asked. Emily was surprised by the question. "Because the ceremony is over, Your Majesty," she answered softly. "The result is clear." Her words were respectful, but Lucian noticed something hidden beneath them. She was not defeated. She was simply tired of hoping for something that never came. That realization affected him more than he expected. The Lycan King had met countless people who wanted his attention because of his title. Many wanted power, influence, or a place beside the throne. Emily wanted none of those things. She only wanted to leave without causing trouble. "You believe this ceremony defines your worth?" Lucian asked. Emily looked down for a moment. "Many people seem to believe it does." The honesty in her answer stayed with him. Lucian knew the kingdom valued strength and legacy above everything else. But standing before him was someone who had shown a different kind of strength. A strength that did not need to be announced. A strength that existed quietly. Before Lucian could say more, the royal advisors approached him. They reminded him that the ceremony had rules and that tradition could not be changed without consideration. Lucian listened, but his attention remained on Emily. For the first time in many years, he questioned whether following tradition was always the same as following what was right. Later that evening, Emily returned to her small home outside the palace walls. She believed the strange moment with the Lycan King was only temporary. She did not think someone as powerful as Lucian Blackveil would truly remember her. But she did not know that the king had already begun asking questions about her. He wanted to understand why an Omega with such quiet courage had been ignored for so long. And while Emily believed her story was ending after the third rejection, the Lycan King was beginning to realize that her true story had only just started. The morning after the ceremony arrived with countless questions spreading throughout Silvermoon Kingdom. The people could not understand why the Lycan King had interrupted a moment that was supposed to follow ancient tradition. For generations, the mating ceremony had been considered the final answer to destiny. Yet King Lucian Blackveil had looked beyond the result everyone accepted. He had looked at Emily Rosewood. While the kingdom continued discussing the unusual event, Emily returned to her simple daily life outside the palace walls. She did not believe anything had changed. To her, the moment with the Lycan King was only a brief interruption in a ceremony that had already proven she was not chosen. She continued caring for villagers, preparing healing remedies, and helping anyone who needed support. That was the one thing she had always known how to do. She could not control how others saw her, but she could control the kindness she offered. Meanwhile, Lucian could not stop thinking about the Omega everyone else had ignored. As the ruler of Silvermoon, he had spent years studying people's intentions. He knew the difference between someone seeking attention and someone acting from genuine compassion. Emily had shown no desire to impress him. She had not asked for recognition. She had not used the moment to gain influence. She had simply accepted the result and walked away with dignity. That was what made her impossible to forget. Lucian ordered his advisors to gather information about Emily Rosewood. At first, the request surprised the royal court. They wondered why the king wanted to learn about an Omega with no noble background. The reports they discovered were unexpected. Emily had spent years helping families throughout the kingdom. She had treated people who could not afford expensive healers. She had traveled through small villages during difficult seasons, offering comfort and support without expecting anything in return. The more Lucian learned, the more he questioned the way the kingdom had judged her. How could someone with such a generous heart be considered unworthy? Later that week, Lucian visited one of the villages where Emily often helped. He wanted to see the truth for himself, away from royal opinions and palace expectations. There, he saw a side of Emily that the ceremony hall had never revealed. A young child smiled when Emily arrived. Elderly villagers greeted her warmly. People who had little still offered her kindness because she had always offered them the same. Lucian watched quietly from a distance, realizing that the kingdom had been searching for strength in the wrong places. They admired titles, wealth, and influence, but they overlooked the person who carried compassion every day. When Emily finally noticed him, she looked surprised. "Your Majesty, what are you doing here?" she asked. Lucian answered honestly. I wanted to understand the person everyone claimed they knew. Emily looked confused. And what did you find? For a moment Lucian had no answer. He had found someone who was stronger than she believed. Someone who had been rejected 3 times but still chose kindness. Someone who proved that destiny was not always revealed through a ceremony. As Lucian returned to the palace, one thought became impossible to ignore. The kingdom had judged Emily by what she lacked. But the Lycan King was beginning to see everything she carried inside. And he knew he needed to discover why fate had connected him to the Omega everyone else had overlooked. The days following Lucian Blackveil's visit to the village brought a quiet change that few people noticed at first. The Lycan King returned to the palace with more questions than answers, but one truth had become impossible to ignore. Emily Rosewood was not the person the kingdom believed her to be. She was not a forgotten Omega waiting for someone to give her value. She had carried her own worth long before anyone finally recognized it. Inside the royal archives, Lucian began searching for information about ancient Omega bloodlines. He wanted to understand why his instincts had reacted so strongly during the mating ceremony. The connection he felt was unlike anything he had experienced before, and as a ruler, he needed to know whether it was simply fate or something much older hidden in history. The royal scholars searched through records that had been untouched for decades. Most documents focused on powerful alpha families and famous warriors, but deep within the forgotten sections of the archives, they discovered references to a rare lineage of healers. The records described Omegas who possessed a gift that was not measured by physical strength or authority. Their power came from their ability to restore balance, bring comfort, and unite people during difficult times. Lucian read the ancient words carefully, feeling a strange connection between those records and the quiet healer he had met. Meanwhile, Emily continued her life without knowing the questions surrounding her. She remained focused on helping others, unaware that the most powerful person in Silvermoon Kingdom was searching for answers about her past. One afternoon, Lucian returned to the village and found Emily caring for an elderly woman who had been struggling with illness. Emily did not notice the king immediately. She was too focused on making sure the woman felt safe and supported. Lucian watched silently, realizing that this was the same person who had stood alone before the entire kingdom, and still refused to let disappointment change her heart. When Emily finally saw him, she smiled politely. "Your Majesty, you did not have to come here again." Lucian looked at her with curiosity. "Why do you always assume people need a reason to visit you?" Emily paused. The question surprised her. She had spent so long believing she was someone people ignored that she never considered another possibility. "Because people usually do not notice me unless they need something," she answered honestly. Her words stayed with Lucian. He realized Emily had not become humble because she lacked confidence. She had become quiet because the world had rarely given her a reason to speak. That evening, Lucian invited Emily to visit the palace archives. He wanted her to see the records that might explain her hidden history. Emily hesitated. The palace represented everything that had made her feel like an outsider. But Lucian's request was different. He was not asking her to prove herself. He was offering her the chance to understand herself. As they entered the ancient archive chambers, Emily saw her family name written in a place she never expected. For generations, her bloodline had been connected to a forgotten role within the kingdom. A role that had disappeared from history. A role that suggested Emily was never insignificant. She was simply waiting for the world to remember what it had forgotten. Lucian looked at her expression and realized the truth was only beginning to unfold. The Omega who had been rejected 3 times was connected to a secret that could change the future of Silvermoon Kingdom forever. The discovery inside the ancient archives changed the way Emily Rosewood saw herself. For most of her life, she had believed she was simply an Omega healer with a quiet gift and an ordinary place in the world. She never imagined that her family name would appear among the oldest records of Silvermoon Kingdom. Yet as she stood inside the forgotten archive chamber, surrounded by writings that had been hidden for generations, she began to wonder if everything she had been told about herself was incomplete. Lucian Blackveil watched her carefully. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Finding out that she was connected to an ancient lineage should have made her feel proud, but instead it made her nervous. Emily had never wanted attention. She had never searched for a special title. She only wanted to help people without being judged. What if this changes how people see me? Emily asked quietly. Lucian looked at her with understanding. Perhaps it will change how they see you. But it should never change how you see yourself. His words reminded her of something important. Her value did not begin when the records were discovered. Her kindness, patience, and courage had existed long before anyone knew her name. As they continued reading through the ancient documents, they discovered more details about the forgotten healer bloodline. The healers were not rulers. They were not chosen because of wealth or influence. They were respected because they protected the connection between the people and those who led them. Their purpose was to remind leaders that strength without compassion could never create a peaceful kingdom. Lucian became quiet as he read those words. As the Lycan King, he had always carried the responsibility of protecting Silvermoon. But he began to understand that leadership was not only about making decisions. It was about understanding the people affected by those decisions. Emily had shown him that without ever trying to teach him. However, the discovery did not remain hidden for long. Rumors began spreading throughout the palace. Some nobles questioned why the Lycan King was spending so much time with an Omega who had no powerful family behind her. They believed ancient records did not change the traditions of the kingdom. Emily heard the whispers and immediately felt the familiar feeling of being unwanted return. She wondered if she had simply moved from being ignored to becoming a reason for conflict. One evening, she approached Lucian and told him she was considering leaving the palace. "I never wanted my existence to create problems," she said. "You are not the problem," Lucian replied. "The problem is that people decided your worth before they ever tried to know you." Emily looked at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. She had spent years hearing reasons why she was not enough. Hearing someone defend her without asking anything in return felt unfamiliar. Meanwhile, the royal council prepared a formal discussion about the ancient records. They wanted answers. They wanted proof. They wanted to understand why the Lycan King had become so interested in an Omega who had once been dismissed by everyone. Lucian knew the coming days would not be easy. Accepting the truth about Emily meant challenging beliefs that had existed for generations. But for the first time, he was not afraid of changing tradition, because he had finally discovered something more important than following the past. He had discovered the person who reminded him what the future of Silvermoon should truly represent. The discussion surrounding Emily Rosewood's forgotten lineage brought a new uncertainty to Silvermoon Kingdom. For the first time in generations, the royal court was forced to question beliefs that had been accepted without hesitation. The ancient records had revealed that the Omega Healer was not simply a forgotten member of society. She was connected to a legacy that represented balance, compassion, and the true responsibility of leadership. Yet not everyone was ready to accept that truth. Emily felt the pressure more than anyone. Even though Lucian Blackveil supported her, she still remembered what it felt like to stand alone in the mating ceremony hall. She remembered the silence after the rejection. She remembered the way people looked at her as if her destiny had already been decided. Those memories made it difficult for her to believe that things could truly be different. Lucian noticed her hesitation and invited her to walk through the royal gardens. Away from the eyes of the court, he wanted to speak with her honestly. "You keep waiting for the moment when people stop believing in you," he said. Emily looked away. "Because that moment has rarely come." Her answer was quiet, but Lucian understood the meaning behind it. She had not lost confidence because she was weak. She had lost confidence because others had repeatedly told her she did not matter. "Then let this be the moment you remember something different," Lucian replied. "Your worth was never decided by them." Emily looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. She had expected the Lycan King to see her as a symbol from an ancient prophecy. Instead, he continued seeing the person behind the title. Meanwhile, the royal council prepared a formal meeting to discuss Emily's future role within the kingdom. Some advisors believed the ancient records were important, but they still struggled with the idea of an Omega standing beside the Lycan King. They questioned whether tradition should change because of one person. During the meeting, Emily was asked what she wanted from Silvermoon. The entire room expected her to request recognition, status, or a place among the royal family. Instead, she answered with a simple wish. "I want a kingdom where people are valued before they are judged." The room became silent. Her words carried no demand. They carried only the same compassion she had shown throughout her entire life. Lucian watched the advisors carefully. He saw some people beginning to understand. Others still held on to old beliefs. But for the first time, the conversation was not about whether Emily deserved a place. It was about whether the kingdom had been wrong for excluding people like her. Later that evening, Lucian found Emily near the palace courtyard. She was watching the lights of Silvermoon shine across the valley. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Emily smiled faintly. "A little. I spent my whole life trying not to be noticed. Now everyone is watching." Lucian understood. The transition from being ignored to being recognized was not always easy. He reminded her that she did not have to become someone else to belong. She had already proven who she was. As the days passed, the kingdom moved closer to a turning point. The ancient records had revealed Emily's past, but they had also revealed something greater. The future of Silvermoon would depend not only on who held power, but on whether that power could recognize kindness. And the Lycan King knew the choice ahead would define the kingdom forever. The days leading to the Royal Council's final decision brought a quiet tension throughout Silvermoon Kingdom. Everyone understood that something important was about to change, but no one knew exactly what that change would mean. For generations, the kingdom had followed a simple belief. Strength belonged to those with power, influence belonged to those with status, and destiny belonged to those chosen by tradition. But Emily Rosewood had challenged every assumption without ever trying to challenge anyone. She had simply remained herself. The Omega healer who had once walked away from the mating ceremony alone was now the person everyone wanted to understand. Lucian Blackveil continued standing beside her, but he also wanted Emily to realize something important. Her place in Silvermoon was not created by his protection. It was created by her own actions. One morning, Lucian invited Emily to visit the villages surrounding the kingdom. He wanted the Royal Council to see what he had already witnessed. The people did not respect Emily because of an ancient record. They respected her because they remembered what she had done for them. As they traveled through the villages, Emily was greeted with warmth and appreciation. Families thanked her for the care she had provided during difficult moments. Children smiled when they saw her because they remembered the healer who always made time for them. Lucian watched quietly, realizing that the kingdom had overlooked someone who had already earned the trust they spent years trying to create. On their journey back to the palace, Lucian asked Emily a question. "After everything that happened, do you still believe you do not belong here?" Emily looked across the landscape before answering. "I do not know if I belong in the palace, but I know I belong wherever I can help people." Her answer reminded Lucian why she was different. She did not seek a crown. She did not seek recognition. She only wanted to make the world better in the small ways she could. When they returned, the Royal Council gathered for the final discussion about the ancient healer lineage. The advisors presented the evidence they had discovered, explaining that Emily's family had once held an important role in maintaining harmony within Silvermoon. The forgotten healers had never been rulers. They had never sought control. Their purpose had always been to remind leaders that a kingdom was built by people, not just by power. Lucian listened carefully before speaking. A tradition that forgets its purpose is no longer protecting the people it was created for. The words surprised the council. The Lycan King had always been known for respecting the old ways, but now they saw something different. He was not rejecting tradition. He was restoring its meaning. Emily stood beside him, still uncertain about how much her life had changed. She looked at the people around her and remembered the girl who had once believed she would never be chosen. She realized that being chosen was not what made her valuable. She had always been valuable. The ceremony had simply failed to recognize it. That evening, Lucian and Emily walked through the palace gardens. The same place where they had once spoken about doubt and fear now represented something new. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Lucian asked. Emily smiled softly. "I am still afraid. But I am not alone anymore." As the moonlight covered Silvermoon Kingdom, the final pieces of the forgotten truth began coming together. The Omega who had been rejected 3 times was no longer a symbol of disappointment. She had become the reminder that destiny does not always arrive in the way people expect. Sometimes it appears as the person everyone else failed to see. The moment Silvermoon Kingdom had been waiting for finally arrived. The royal hall was filled with nobles, villagers, and members of every pack, who had come to witness a decision that would shape the future of the kingdom. For many, it was not only about the forgotten healer lineage. It was about whether Silvermoon was ready to change the way it saw people who had been overlooked for generations. Emily Rosewood stood beside the Lycan King, but she did not feel like someone standing above others. She still carried the same humility she had always carried. She remembered the days when people ignored her, when her name meant nothing in the eyes of the powerful, and when she believed her only purpose was to quietly help from the shadows. Now everyone was watching her, and that was something she was still learning to accept. Lucian Blackveil looked across the hall and understood the importance of the moment. He had spent his life protecting the kingdom, but he realized that protection was not only about defending borders or preserving traditions. It was about having the courage to recognize when those traditions had forgotten their original purpose. Today we do not honor someone because of an ancient name, Lucian announced. We honor someone because of the choices she has made every day. The hall became silent as he spoke about Emily's years of service, her compassion, and the kindness she had shown when no one expected anything from her. He did not present her as someone who needed to be saved. He presented her as someone who had already proven her strength. Emily listened carefully, feeling emotions she struggled to describe. She had once believed that being chosen by destiny would be the greatest moment of her life. But standing there, she realized something important. Destiny was not valuable because it gave her importance. Destiny was valuable because it helped others finally recognize the importance she had always carried. After the announcement, the kingdom slowly began to change. The people who once judged Omegas by old assumptions started to see them differently. Young healers were encouraged to develop their gifts. Families who had once been ignored were given opportunities to be heard. The changes did not happen overnight, but the first step had been taken. Later that evening, Emily walked through the palace gardens with Lucian. The same gardens where they had once shared their doubts now felt completely different. "Do you ever miss the life you had before all of this?" Lucian asked. Emily smiled softly. "Sometimes. Life was simpler when nobody noticed me." Lucian looked at her with understanding. "And now?" Emily looked toward the lights of Silvermoon shining in the distance. "Now I know being seen is not something to fear." Lucian realized that Emily's greatest transformation was not becoming recognized by the kingdom. It was learning that she deserved to be recognized. The connection between them had grown from curiosity into trust, and from trust into something deeper that neither of them needed to force. It existed naturally, built through understanding and respect. Meanwhile, the ancient records revealed one final message hidden within their pages. The prophecy had never been about a king finding someone to complete his power. It was about two people discovering that true leadership required balance. Strength needed compassion. Authority needed understanding. And a kingdom needed both. As the moon rose above Silvermoon, Emily looked back at the journey that brought her there. The third rejection that once felt like the end of her story had become the beginning of everything. She was no longer the Omega nobody chose. She was the person who reminded an entire kingdom what it meant to truly see someone. Years later, the story of Emily Rosewood became one of the most remembered tales in Silvermoon Kingdom. Not because she was chosen by a ceremony, not because an ancient record revealed her forgotten lineage. Her story was remembered because she showed an entire kingdom that true worth could never be decided by a single moment of rejection. The girl who once stood alone in the center of the royal hall had become a symbol of hope for everyone who had ever felt unseen. Emily often thought about the journey that brought her there. She remembered the third rejection, the whispers from the crowd, and the feeling that perhaps she would never have a place in the world she lived in. At that time, she believed destiny had closed a door in front of her. She never imagined that the same moment would lead her toward a future she could not have dreamed of. As the years passed, Emily continued her work as a healer, but now she was no longer hidden in the background. People from every corner of Silvermoon came to learn from her, not because of her title, but because of the compassion she showed every day. She taught young healers that their abilities were not measured by how powerful they appeared. They were measured by the difference they made in the lives of others. Lucian Blackveil remained at her side, not as someone who rescued her, but as someone who walked beside her. Their bond had grown from a moment of curiosity into a partnership built on trust, respect, and understanding. The Lycan King had once believed that leadership meant carrying every responsibility alone. Emily showed him that a true leader also needed to listen, to understand, and to recognize the voices that were often ignored. Together, they helped Silvermoon become a kingdom where people were valued for who they were rather than what others expected them to be. One evening, Emily and Lucian returned to the same ceremony hall where everything had begun. The room that once held her greatest disappointment now held a completely different meaning. Children gathered there to learn about the history of the kingdom. They heard the story of the Omega who was rejected 3 times but never allowed rejection to define her. Do you ever think about what would have happened if that ceremony had gone differently? Lucian asked her quietly. Emily looked around the hall and smiled. If it had gone differently, I might never have discovered who I truly was. Lucian understood. The greatest moments in life were not always the ones people expected. Sometimes the hardest moments revealed the strongest parts of a person. The kingdom had once believed Emily needed someone to choose her before she could have value. But the truth was the opposite. She already had value. She had always carried it within her. The choice of others only revealed what had been there all along. Under the silver moonlight, Emily stood beside the Lycan King, looking over the kingdom that had once overlooked her. She was no longer the Omega who waited for acceptance. She was the healer, the guide, and the reminder that kindness could change even the oldest traditions. And everyone in Silvermoon finally understood the lesson her life had taught them. True strength was never about being the person everyone noticed first. True strength was about remaining kind when the world failed to notice you at all.